name is Theresa Wrangham. I'm your moderator tonight for our panel. Tonight is a panel discussion on approaches to autism, and we'll be discussing RDI. We'll be looking into RDI as a treatment and understanding more of that approach. And tonight we have with us Rob Bernstein, and he's going to introduce our panelists. Take it away, Rob.
Thank you, Theresa. Wenn Lawson will be joining us later, and I'll start with introducing Stephen Shore. He wrote the book Autism for Dummies, and he also wrote this book Beyond the Wall, and others, but these are the two that I have. And maybe I'll be referring to one of them later. He's an autistic professor at Adelphi University. And my favorite line, as I've heard him talk many times, is that his mother was told when he was very young that Stephen really belongs in an institution. He says, you know, they were right. I did belong in an institution, just that it's an institution of higher learning. And he got his doctorate from Boston University. Next, I want to introduce Dr. Rachelle Sheely. She's kind of the star of the show here, and the president of RDI Connect. Now, RDI is Relationship Development Intervention. So we will be talking about relationships. And along with her extensive training, Dr. Sheely brings an accomplished background in education, art, music, and poetry. And as we all know, these are important. It's important to be around. So she could inject in creativity, originality into the teaching, training, and management of thousands of professionals and families that she reaches on a daily basis. And she really spent a lifetime, who hasn't spent a lifetime? We've all spent a lifetime working with children on professional level, on a personal level, and her work extends far beyond treatment into the everyday moments that resonate in the lives of her clients. I'm going to introduce myself now and then go back to Theresa. I wrote a book, Uniquely Normal, and this is tapping the reservoir of normalcy to treat autism with the forward by Temple Grandin. And I've been seeing people on the spectrum for over 30 years. And now I want to introduce the moderator who's going to be part of the discussion, I'm sure, Theresa Wrangham. And now she became a parent advocate as a result of her daughter, Rachel, who was on the, or is on the autism spectrum. So she brings an experienced parent's perspective on raising healthy children affected by ASD. Now, she's also on the board of directors for the Autism Society of Colorado and other boards. And also, she's on the board for our US Autism Association, who is sponsoring this today, and served as their conference moderator for over 10 years. It might be a lot more than that. So now I'm going to turn it back to Theresa, who'll be moderating the program.
Thanks so much, Rob. Just as a clarification, I don't serve on the board of Autism Society of Colorado any longer. It was a short stint, but I am co-founder for the Autism Society of Boulder County here in Colorado. I did retire from that board, but it was my privilege to start that organization. Before we start our discussion tonight around RDI, or Relationship Development Intervention, I just want to tell our viewers tonight that this is a series, and it's the second or third in a series just looking at the many approaches to helping individuals on the spectrum. And as we discuss, we've got professionals here, as you know, and as we go through our discussion, what I'd like you to bear in mind is this is a discussion. It's meant to be a starting point for you, and it's not meant as medical advice. You should always seek out medical advice and make sure that whatever you're pursuing is an appropriate fit for your child. So with that, I'd like to start with Stephen Shore, my fellow advisory board member. And Stephen, this series was kind of your brainchild. Why don't you tell the people who are tuning in tonight a little bit about the series as a whole, and then we can start discussing a little bit more what RDI is about.
Yeah, I'll certainly be glad to. So it's beginning in my doctoral studies, I became aware that there were many approaches for supporting autistic individuals. And I was fascinated by the way the different approaches work and the different theories. And wouldn't it be great to have a nice scientific study to learn more about the approaches? So I did I began my lit review, and the closest I could find were research studies done usually by someone in the behavioral approaches, and it would be titled something like ABA is contrasted with eclectic approaches or something like that. And you don't even need to get past the title to know who's going to win. And my thought was, this is the wrong way to study these things. And the way to look at these is to learn what are the salient points, what are the strengths of each approach, what do they specifically address? And it only makes sense that since the autism spectrum is so wide and diverse, that different approaches are going to help different people. And so what my research did is it opened the door towards fairly comparing approaches. In that way, moving the conversation towards not which approach is the best, but which approach is best for this child at this time. And in that way, better support autistic individuals. And what I find interesting is, or I have found interesting, is that in addition to different children being helped by different approaches, certainly different clinicians are going to favor different approaches. And that's perfectly fine because no one can be an expert in RDI and ABA and Miller method and teach and floor time and this and that. But I think if we can move towards specializing in a particular approach, or maybe even two, but also having enough awareness to say, well, I'm not sure if what I have is helping the kid. So I'm going to refer him to Dr. Sheely, because I think what goes on in an RDI is really what the kid needs. And similarly, Dr. Sheely could do a similar thing. So that is what this is all about. It's an extension of my research, and it's a great honor to have Dr. Sheely here for us to focus on RDI for tonight.
Thanks, Stephen. That's such a wonderful overview and segue. I remember my daughter is 30 years old, and I remember waiting for something like RDI to come along because she was diagnosed at University of Utah. And she was in some of the first studies that Dr. Ozenoff did around executive functioning and could children on the autism spectrum, do they have the ability to have executive function? And how can we help them socialize and generalize across different environments? So Dr. Sheely, I'd love to hear a little bit more about RDI Connect and how did you get started in RDI? And let's give the viewers tonight a little bit of an overview of what RDI is.
Okay. Thanks, Theresa. And I think in about the 90s, my husband and I were living here in Houston, Texas. He was at Texas Children's Hospital. And if you know anything about the Texas Medical Center, it's huge, maybe the largest in the world. And he was a psychologist on staff at Texas Children's Hospital. And these children were being brought in from around the world. And it was like, they're talking, but we're not having a conversation with them. And so Steve got very, very interested in these kids because they were clearly bright children and they were all cute. And our girls were cute. And so we were at that stage in our lives where we were looking at cute children. And having taught for about 10 years, I was interested too, because I just couldn't figure out what was going on. So Steve and I began to look at the children. At that time, the incidence was 1 in 10,000. And so it was very rare. People weren't talking about it. And we got fascinated by it and began to think about what is it about this particular population that would lend itself to a developmental approach. And we were both interested in the parent-child relationship. So we came at it from that background. As we began to meet the children and as we began to meet their parents, we were surprised by some of the research which said that these beautiful children and who were clearly bright were not finding jobs as an adult. And I mean, it was that clear. It wasn't a lot of jargon or anything. It's like they don't have jobs, which we couldn't quite understand. So Steve and I began to look at the research and development. And as we looked at it, we could see that around the world, people raise their children in a certain way. And they are empowered to raise their children. Their children are good apprentices to them. And that got us thinking, well, can we replicate that? And naively, we thought we could replicate development, which, as I can say, we've always been on a learning curve. We couldn't do, but what we could do was we could help parents reestablish that guiding relationship with their children so that the kinds of things employers are looking for in this century we're living in are the kinds of things that get built into the everyday experiences of the children. So it's a parent empowerment program. It helps the parents establish the guiding relationship with their children, and it helps the children become apprentices just like all of us. You know, I've been mentored by wonderful people, and they never made me do anything. They never tried to get me to do anything. I was excited to be in a relationship with them and to learn from them. So that was where we started, and that's where we still are.
I'd like to pop in here, Theresa, if I can. I just think it's really underestimated, this idea of training parents and getting parents involved with their own kid. It's the most powerful tool, really, we have for significant change. And it really is not being systematically done at all. I don't know why. Maybe it's the medical model that, you know, I'll tell you what you need instead of I'm going to empower you to help your child. And we need to understand the personalities and the relationships of the parents to the therapist, the parents to their kid. It really gets involved, but it's worthwhile because it is so important. And I'm so glad that that's your focus, parental involvement. I so admire that.
I think it was a mystery to us as well when we first started, because we were actually looking at really good parents. We were not looking at parents who didn't know what to do. You know, Houston has big families, so we could see 5 or 6 children where we could see the quality of parenting. So in thinking about how we could help these parents, we did become pretty systematic. But what we became systematic with was how you analyze what is going on in the family system, and then how you develop hypotheses. So RDI isn't a one size fits all. It's about understanding where the parents are, where the child is, and what a hypothesis is. I like to say that every time I meet a family, it's a new hypothesis, because I'm trying to understand, if I impact it from this end, what's going to happen over here. And so when we train our consultants to do that, we tell them up front, this is hard. What you're going to be learning to do is really hard, but it's really rewarding. And recently, I'll talk too much. You can just wave your hand and I'll stop. Recently, because we've been doing this for a while now, the children that we began with in the 90s are coming of age now. And so we're beginning to hear from them. And it's been really exciting to see where they are in their relationships with friends and wives and parents and siblings, and what they're doing in terms of jobs.
think that's wonderful. And if I could paraphrase Dr. Sheely, it sounds like what you're really advocating for is meeting the child where they're at. That's what makes this job perhaps tough. And I think it's tough for any therapist, whether you do ABA or RDI or CERTs. If you're good at what you do, you look at where the child's at and you start from there. It's child-led. Do you think that's an accurate way to put that?
And I think the other thing that made RDI different when we started was that we weren't looking at a deficit model. We were looking at vulnerabilities, but we weren't looking at a deficit. We were looking at strengths as well. And so if you can key into a person's strengths and build on that strength and move the child along, parents can move the child along, we felt like the sky was the limit. And we felt that we could look at something as specific as jobs as an adult, and we could keep our focus on that and work toward it.
I just saw that Dr. Lawson joined us. So Rob, why don't you introduce Dr.
Yes.
Lawson, and we've got our round robin.
Terrific. Good timing, Wen. Good to see you. I hope you're doing well. And Wenn Lawson is another person on our panel who does have Asperger's. He didn't speak until after 4, but Dr. Wenn Lawson is a well-respected, highly knowledgeable expert on autism. And I think if he says 2 or 3 words, you'll all agree with that. He combines his lived experience insights with professional knowledge, ranging from first-class honors in social work to a doctorate in psychology. Wen's been public speaking for more than 20 years and published his first book on autism, Life Behind Glass, in 1998, and he's written over 20 books. And I'm adding something to your bio, Wen. I feel that you're the epitome of becoming who you are. So I want to welcome Wen as part of our group, and just to catch you up, we have Dr. Sheely, who's part of RDI, and we're just started really talking about this relationship development intervention that she's been doing.
No, thank you very much, and I apologize for being late. Thank you.
Oh, we're so pleased to have you. Now that you've joined us, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your interest in RDI.
It's probably a very basic interest. Interventions, I'm not keen even on the word because it sounds like someone's interrupting my life. But a lovely thing about RDI is that it's relationship based, and it is, as you just were talking about, child-led. That means that we hope that anybody supporting us is hopefully going to know those things that interest us, because using our interest is that very, very particular factor that changes everything. When we're interested, we're motivated, we're part of the team. So that to me is the essential ingredient.
I think that's, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Rob.
No, I was just going to clarify and add to that Dr. Sheely was talking about when she does her RDI intervention, so-called, she looks at the family system. So I'm imagining a family who wants to just go to restaurants all the time or wants to read all the time. You have to see their system and see if the kid fits into their system. And if the kid isn't a reader, it could disrupt their family structure. So that relates to what you're saying, interest, and not only interest of the individual such as yourself, but the interest of the family dynamics. And I was so glad to hear that's part of her perspective of healing and getting making progress.
We not only have a family system, we have a person with a personality, and we have a person with a temperament. And those things are really cool. You know, I have 2 daughters, and they are so different. Their personalities are so different. And yet, when my children were little, there were some things that were really important to me. There was the culture that they were growing up in. There were the beliefs that our family has. There was the faith that I have. So there were these things that were important to me. And I was determined that I would be able to share these with my children. I don't think it's any different if you have a child who has vulnerabilities. You have your beliefs, you have the culture that you live in, and you have the way you want your child or your children to grow up in the world. And so when I think about mothering my own children, I don't see it as that different. I see vulnerabilities and I see things that co-occur. But I feel like those basic things that we do as parents guide us. And we have to feel that we're competent in guiding our children that way.
Dr. Sheely, we had a question from one of the viewers that I wanted to ask you. The question is, can RDI be used with older adults on the spectrum?
Well, is 62 old enough?
You know, I'm getting older and 62 is starting to sound young.
I know. No, I worked with a 62-year-old man, and I just felt it went really great. A lot of people get diagnosed much later in life, and so I've had experience working with people, teenagers, 20s, 30s, and then the oldest person that I ever met who came in and said, "I don't want to work with you, I just want to meet you." She was in her 80s, and she used to kind of show up in my office and talk for a while. So,
Oh my. Well, so I guess the answer is a resounding yes.
yes.
I want to pitch a question to our self-advocates because Dr. Sheely, I thought what you said was so apropos. As a parent myself, I have one child on the spectrum and another that I guess we term neurotypical. Parenting in the culture of parenting, it is about your family and who you are. And to me, as a parent, my job was to slow the world down a little bit so that my eldest daughter on the spectrum had the opportunity to digest it a little bit and catch up. But I soon found that, like any child, both my children are adults now, I had to let go of what's important to me. They also, as you said, have personalities and temperaments. They grow up into adults, are going to have their own ideas. So I'd like to hear from Stephen and Dr. Schwer and Dr. Lawson as self-advocates. How did that work for you in relation to your parents, being acknowledged as I've come around the fullness of this and I have my own ideas? How would you guide self-advocates on that journey?
I believe the importance of parents and family cannot be overstated. So in my situation, my parents, they refuted the professional's recommendations for institutionalization in favor of what we would today call an intensive home-based early intervention program. And there were a lot of things that my parents did that also seemed to happen in RDI. So for example, my parents met me where I was. When they tried to get me to imitate them, which is a time-honored educational strategy. All right, this is how, I'll show you how to do it, now you do it. But maybe due to a difference in mirror neurons, it doesn't work with many young autistic children. So my parents flipped it around and they imitated me. If I flapped, they flapped. If I made some echolalic sound from the environment, so did they. And when they did that, I became aware of them in my environment. And upon doing so, they were developing a relationship. And I believe that a prerequisite for doing authentic and solid work with an autistic person is that you have to develop a trusting relationship first. Then you can move on. And what I find is that the people who are best at being with autistic people do that. And as Rachelle mentioned, is this something that we just do for autistic people? Or is this an extension of good practice, be it teaching practice, counseling practice, whatever you want to call it, type practice? And what I find is ever increasing examples. Those special strategies that we initially develop for autistic people, be it visually based communication, alternative communications, modifications to the environment, whatever it might be, they're really just extensions, again, of good practice. And I see that also in when I talk to supervisors, for example, at businesses. Rachelle, you mentioned something about employment. And for those enlightened companies that strive to hire autistic people, people who are neurodiverse, a common theme that I get from supervisors is that their work in improving their education, improving their communication, for example, and managing strategies so that they can better interact and support their autistic or neurodiverse employees, in fact, make them better managers overall.
I think that's a nice way of saying there are so many things that no matter where you come in, whether it's as a parent or self-advocate, a lot of what I've learned anyway is you're treating people the same. You know, you might have to slow it down and break it down differently for someone on the spectrum, but
Right.
good teaching strategies are good teaching strategies.
Yeah, exactly.
Dr. Lawson, did you have something to add about?
Only treating the same or treating equally according to need is a bit different. You know that picture where they've got kids looking at a sporting game and there's different height children and they're leaning over the fence trying to watch? Well, if you treated them the same, they've all got access through the fence. But to treat them equally, you have to have that same height. So the younger, shorter person, so you putting them on the box to stand up so that they can see. That's treating them equally without treating them the same necessarily. I don't treat all my kids the same because they're not the same. But I understand what you mean. You're saying you give them the same respect, the same to whatever it is that young person needs. I sometimes have a mobility scooter because I need access sometimes to get around, and you could sort of think, I could think, and I have in the past, oh, I can't do that, but yes, I can. I just do it differently, and that's the emphasis, I think.
That's a great way to put it.
I've got something to add to that. What Wenn is talking about is the idea of equity. Treat everybody equally. Everybody gets 2 boxes to stand on to look over the fence. The tall person doesn't need a box at all, but we have to treat everybody the same, so he gets 2 and he's ridiculously high. A very, very short person gets 2 boxes, but it's still not enough. And in fact, it only fits the 3rd one, who's like a medium height. And so that's treating everybody equally. What Wenn is talking about is treating people equitably and providing people for what they need. And in that way, the tall person doesn't have a box and his head is at the same, it can look over the fence. The medium-sized person gets 1 box and his head is at the same height as the person who's very tall. The short person gets 2 boxes and that person's head is at the same height. And we can even take that 1 step further. And that is, can we design the fence in such a way, and we do have to have the fence because it keeps balls from flying out of the ballpark. Can we design the fence in such a way that everybody, no matter what height they are, have an equal chance of seeing the football field? And so if we change it from a picket fence, for example, or a wood fence to a chain link fence, the fence does what it needs to do. And we've designed the fence, and we can use that as an analogy for the curriculum, the job, or whatever it is, so that it fits everybody. And that's an important tenet of universal design.
I wanted to take a moment and see, since this is a series, Dr. Sheely or any of you who want to jump in, let's talk a little bit about what makes RDI unique or different from ABA, 4-time certs teach? I guess Dr. Sheely and Dr. Lawson, do you want to start that?
Dr. Sheely first, eh?
All right, Dr. Sheely, you're elected.
Okay, thank you. Actually, when I was teaching school, I ran an inner city classroom in an inner city school, operant conditioning. And so I have a really strong background in operant conditioning. And one of the things that worried me about it was that the kids would pretty much do anything I wanted them to do. I just saw a passivity in them, and it made me uneasy. So when we started thinking about RDI, we wanted to think about what are the motivators that will help children be more resilient, will help them take on their own learning. And we came up with the idea that competence is our best motivator. And as someone who likes a challenge, when I feel competent, I'm ready to go. And so we've really designed RDI around, first of all, the goals of employment for the 21st century, what those are, what employers are saying. But we feel that we get there through the guiding relationship and also with the internal rewards people have when they're competent to figure things out.
Can you walk us through a tangible example so that our viewers have a starting point to work with? You talk about employment, and that is so key. So there's so much of this population that are unable to get a job. What would be a tangible way RDI would say prep someone on the spectrum maybe for an interview? How would you teach that in RDI, that relationship back and forth?
From the very beginning, when we're working with the family, we have the family create situations in the home, kind of everyday things, doing the laundry, washing the car, raking the leaves, whatever, where they actually work on things like problem solving and flexibility. I have my list here because I keep it on my desk. I mean, to me, this is the gold standard of where I want to be. So I'm just telling you, I already have this. Anyway, teamwork. So if you're cooking food, you can actually do teamwork, relationship building, analysis and appraisal, perspective taking, self-awareness, ongoing growth and development, uncertainty management, which I think is a huge thing, and then creativity and innovation. So when we have our parents working with the children, they might decide that they're going to do the dishes today. All right. Who wants to do the dishes? Nobody. But our kids are expected to do everything in the family that everybody else does. So they're going to do the dishes. And the parents might say, well, first of all, before we do the dishes, we have to set the table. And so they set the table. There are 4 plates, there are 4 glasses, there are 4 knives, there are 4 spoons, and there are 3 forks. And it's so simple. But what does that person feel when he's never had to figure out how to get another fork? Might have to wash one, might have to get in the good silver and find one. It's such a simple thing. And so we like simplicity. And, I loved what you said about slowing down, because I feel like we rush our children around so much, and they're vulnerable children. They can't be on this fast pace all the time. So slowing it down and creating opportunities to be part of the family and to add to what's happening with the family is really important. So when we come to a job interview, there have already been these experiences that are going to help them with that job interview. So the kind of coaching you would give anybody when they go into a job interview, dress up, Be polite. Don't chew gum. So, we would work on the same kinds of things. But I really believe, Theresa, that when we can look at these things that employers are looking for, and if we can look at those from the very beginning, our kids are going to be ready. They're going to be ready when they're adults.
I hear you saying use real life as a teachable moment. Would that be fair? And that
Thank
you
you.
help parents structure that?
Thank you for that phrase. I'm going to use it next time and not talk so much. I appreciate it.
That was useful. My mind immediately goes to some of our kids who are demand avoidant, PDA kids, some of the kids who are not visual, some of the kids who have to be, they're kinesthetic, they need to be on the move whilst they're thinking, or their ADHD. And you've got to think constantly, how can I bring, for this personality, this disposition, the same kind of teaching that you're talking about in a way that makes it accessible for them. We've got our 5-year-old granddaughter with us at the moment, and we don't say to her, what would you like for breakfast? She can't handle being asked those sorts of questions. So it's either the plate, the bowl, the cereal, and she makes the choice, or it's a plate and she'll have a few cashew nuts and a couple of peaches and nothing must be touching, and it's just set there, and all we do is say it's breakfast time. And if she doesn't come, she might take her plate and sit with it in a different room. Sometimes she can't be with lots of people. All those things are still problem solving, but they have to be tuned into her learning style, if you like. And otherwise parents just feel they're not good parents because they can't traditionally organize for their young person to do the sorts of things everybody else manages to do in the family. So negotiation, and it's very much part of RDI. Negotiation rather than dictation is useful in that respect too.
Yeah, when I have to say that it has been for me a very hard sell to say to people, we're not going to make your child do something. We're not going to get him to do something. We're going to open up possibilities. We're going to provide the support that's necessary. But your child has a mind, and we want to see your child using his mind. I have a 5-year-old granddaughter too, grandson. We'll talk about them later.
Rob, you had something to say?
I have something to say. I really do, because I'm talking to the staff, including the principal and the teacher, psychologist at the school system last Friday, and you could really help me and maybe help the entire, all kind of school districts. You might be doing it already, but here, you're talking about real life situations. So here's a kid who's having a tantrum, and the principal decides, oh, she should go into this room. That's going to be better for her. And a tantrum's continuing. It's making things worse. And her result of this is that, oh, the kid needs more counseling. We're going to send her off to a counselor 3 times a week instead of once a week. And I'm going, wait. This is a real life situation. All she needed to do is, and it just reflects what Wen is saying, ask the kid why she's upset. They don't do that. So they don't think they're competent because they're not psychologists, counselors, they're teachers and principals. And if she just asked her why she was upset, she would say, oh, Connor pushed me. And I'm upset because when I can't push him. I mean, just ask the kid. That's all you have to do at that moment. Real life learning. And between you and me, they didn't get it. I need support such as you coming into the schools, right? I know your expertise as parents, but I need the schools to understand that they could help the kids in that situation right then and right now.
Thanks, Rob. We have a question. I guess this is for Dr. Sheely, but any of you can, pitch in on the answer. RDI is about relationships, but we know that the autism population, I think about 40% is what we would call nonverbal. However, of course, that doesn't mean they can't communicate. How does that impact using RDI? Have you used it with nonverbal individuals?
Absolutely. And, we can learn a lot about communication if we watch what people are trying to tell us. Having two grandchildren that I would love to talk about, but I will not do that. But having two grandchildren, one who was kind of a late talker and a daughter who was a late talker, I realized that by decreasing the amount of language I used with them, by taking the demand off of them, it helped them calm down. So in RDI, we talk about communication first. Communication, language being the icing on the cake. And when we talk about communication, we're also talking about a very specific way of talking to children. And we refer to that as declarative language. So instead of asking a lot of questions, trying to get children to say things, we will throw something out there and say something like maybe, I don't know what you did at school today. Instead of, what did you do at school today? What happened? It's like, I don't know what you did at school today. And what we'll usually see is maybe the child will get something to show us, or maybe the child will actually say something, fire truck. But language is something that I think we need to approach carefully, because if a child is struggling with language and we begin to put demands on that child, talk, I think we're going to set up roadblocks for the child. And so everybody, all the hundreds of children that I've seen, one of them never did talk. But everybody else talked at some point, but we gave them time to communicate. And, there are some reasons why children have trouble talking. We have to understand those. We need to bring in people.
But what about that's excellent, by the way, because I think we rush our children. But what about for the individuals on the spectrum who truly, for whatever reason, have been unable to vocalize and maybe use PECS, which is the picture exchange communication system? Is if somebody has a child who's working with PECS or hasn't been able to vocalize as of yet, would you still say, hey, RDI is still an option for you? Language is not simply, verbalization. Have you had that kind of experience?
I have. I have, Theresa, and what I believe is that there are all kinds of things people who do not have language can do. It's a terrible deficit. And I can see the struggle with children who are trying to talk and they can't do it. In RDI, we have everybody has an assessment. We have an assessment where we look at the relationship. But one thing that I think is really important is we look at obstacles. And when we look at an obstacle, we're asking, what are we missing here? What don't we understand? And then we bring in an expert in that field. So for a child who has apraxia or aphasia, something like that, I'm going to work with an expert because I'm not an expert in that kind of thing. I can see that it's a problem, but I need to make sure that child is able to communicate no matter how they do it. And so we have part of our training is an obstacle assessment. Is there something going on that you are not, as a consultant, prepared to handle? And find an expert.
Go ahead, Rob.
And I want to make a distinction. I would love some feedback from anybody on this as well. That when a kid starts talking, there's often one word utterance, right? In typical development, after a year, there's one word. But with the Asperger autism population, it's that association, dog, ball. But there's a huge difference between one word and two words that relate to each other. This might be the beginning of relationship problems. So if a kid says 2 words, mommy sweater, that's not my example, it's Lois Bloom's from Columbia, mommy sweater, it's not mommy sweater, the 2 words put together. There's an idea behind that it's mommy sweater. It means possession. The kid is relating the words. It's their first opportunity, perhaps, for this relationship issue to be visible, to occur. And a lot of our autistic kids who are 10, 12, 15 are not giving those 2-word connect, the syntax. You know, syntax means meaning. So I just want to make that distinction of learning language, how a kid may learn some words and then I hear from another teacher, oh, we increased the vocabulary 50 words. Well, how about 2 words working together? That's so much more important.
It's an excellent point. Dr. Lawson, I wanted to just come back to you for a moment because you talked about something that I think is so important with not rushing. I know for my own daughter, one of my mistakes, and I had to really catch myself on, was not offering too much choice or offering something too open-ended. So I would often tailor something as saying, would you like this or that, or maybe displaying it. Is that kind of what you were alluding to earlier in terms of not overwhelming an individual?
Yes, absolutely. Being autistic means we're very single-minded, single-focused, and we tend to have attention available singularly. So we're not good at multitasking unless we're interested. If you ask me about birds, which I'm really passionate about, I can hear them singing, I can point them out in the tree, I can describe them, etc. But I don't have that same skill in the family dynamics or in the kitchen because I'm not interested. So it's really important to understand how our minds are cognitively put together and not overwhelming us, this or that, first and next, those sorts of things. And I have a really lovely friend called Tim Chan, and you can look him up if you're willing to, wanting to. And he doesn't use speech to communicate. He uses augment. He uses a machine called a light writer, and he types on that, and sometimes an iPad. And he has so much to say, just not through traditional ways. And I love what you're saying, Rachelle, that it's communication, however a person needs that, but one at a time is brilliant, in my opinion.
Stephen, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I did. And getting back to communication, verbal versus nonverbal, I wonder if it's better to think about verbal versus non-speaking. Because there's
a better parameter, I would agree.
Yeah, because nonverbal means you don't understand language at all, which does happen. And it's a pretty serious situation. But there are so many autistic people who just don't have the neurology to speak, but communicate just fine using some other device. It could be PACS, it could be some assistive communication device, it might be sign language. And just observing for how that person communicates, even without these things, through good observation, we can begin to understand the individual. What are their preferences? What are their likes and dislikes? And from there, build a reliable communication. I think that's the most important thing we can do, is build some form of reliable communication. And if it's a non-speaking one, research suggests that if verbal interaction is going to come, it's going to come faster because the person now understands what language is all about. If it's not going to come, at least there's a reliable means of communication.
I think what you said is really brilliant. And I can think of times when we didn't know what a person was thinking or feeling, and they figured out how to communicate to us. I'll give a very brief example. There's a young man in India named Mohit Lakhani, and his mother used to say to me, if only I knew what he was thinking and feeling. And they discovered that he was actually an artist. And he began, he's exhibited in Paris, he began to do these huge paintings. And she said to me, I know what he's saying to me now. His artwork has been picked up by a fashion designer in India. He's probably going to make $1 million. But he's communicating, and it's a way that we wouldn't typically think about communicating, but he figured it out, and she was there to say, I know where you're going. She supported him, and now his work is beautiful.
We had a number of years ago, I'm not sure what word to use. He wasn't vocal, but he used a board to communicate on. And he was on our self-advocate panel. I have to say, just his word usage was profound. And we often, at least in my opinion, assume that someone who is unable to maybe speak like a lot of us do is somehow unable to think at that level. And it's wonderful to see all these new technologies come into being that allow any special needs population to communicate, because they're in there. They're in there. They're profound thinkers, and communication just takes so many forms. I want to touch on something that I think has really impacted all our viewers, families, people on the spectrum, and that's COVID. COVID-19 has had a huge impact on every family in the nation. Depending on what state you live in, you may have had to stay in your home longer. But I really wonder about its impact to this population, the autism spectrum, and more directly, when we talk about RDI and its ability to be used in this population, what advice would you give to parents who now no longer have access to an RDI professional, perhaps because of COVID? Now their children have no routine, or they're young adults or whatever. Common sense, nuts and bolts, how can they continue with helping their children or their autistic loved one to continue to progress within RDI?
Well, we've always been online.
Okay.
And we've always been online. And we've always said to parents, what happens between sessions is more important than happens in the session. Now, I know some of you will know what I'm talking about. But do you remember the VHS tapes?
Oh, yeah.
I remember 8 tracks even.
Yeah, well, we weren't there yet. We started with VHS, and parents would overnight them to us, and we would look at what they were doing. Oh my God, when the internet came about, we were in heaven, because we'd already been doing distance work with families. So now it's really very simple, because we're working on the guiding relationship. We're always objective and goal driven. The activities, whatever those are, they're secondary. And so it's a collaborative effort between the parents and us. And between sessions, whether it's 1 week or 2 weeks or 4 weeks, we like to say we're working ourselves out of a job, not into a job. And so however long it is, the parents upload their videos. And so by the time I get ready to talk to a parent again, I don't say, how was your week? I know how the week was. And I'm efficiently able to use the time that I spend with them. And sometimes they'll put the kids up, and sometimes we'll do a demonstration or a role play. I'll have a video I want them to watch, and they'll try it with the child on camera, and I'll coach them. But for us, I mean, I don't mean this the way it's not. COVID is awful. I can't wait for it to be over. Everybody feels that it's awful. But for us, I feel like we were prepared to do the distance work because we had been doing it from the beginning.
Good to know. David, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I do. When I think about coping and even thriving during the COVID-19 pandemic, brings to mind 3 major things. And these, I believe, are universal to everybody, autistic or otherwise. And that is the maintenance of the routines that we've grown to know throughout our lives, and trying to keep everything the same where possible. However, that's not always possible because we're stuck at home. So how close can we keep the routine the same? So instead of going to grandma's house every Friday night because it's not safe, what about doing a Zoom meeting? It's a second best, but it's better than nothing. A Zoom meeting in its place. That also means we need to be more intentional in keeping track of friends, so that child who was depressed, that they could not visit their friends, I maybe would have gotten into a conversation with him. Well, gee, if you wanted to communicate with somebody or see somebody, you think there might be another way to do it? And brainstorm a way of doing so, ending up with using FaceTime or some other sort of video software like Zoom in order to do so. So keeping things the same as possible, making modifications where needed. Instead of going to work, well, work now takes place at a specific corner of the house, room in the house, computer on the house. Likewise for school, mimicking the school schedule as closely as possible, keeping in touch with the child's support team, whether it's their teacher or their RDI therapist or whoever it might be. And with all of this comes with the ever-present need for communication, and communicating in the best way that autistic person communicates, however it might be, and making sure that we're doing that and have the proper devices if needed. And then finally, for everybody, whether it's parents, whether it's the autistic person, whether it's a support person, taking care of yourself. And it may just be as simple as knowing when to take 10 deep breaths and teaching the autistic person to do that. It may be a matter of breathing in and pressing your hands together and breathing out and pulling them apart. And if you need another dose, you can do the same thing with making a fist and opening up your hands. So some very simple yoga-ish type things for self-care, and that's for everybody.
I agree.
Yeah.
Been tough on everyone. Ben, did you have something that you wanted to share?
Well, with everybody at home, I can't work in the kitchen if the kids come in, so we would have a little tape we put along the kitchen floor. This is my workspace, that's your space. Whilst I'm in here, you have to be there. You can see me, but you mustn't cross over, and no talking to me. You know, we have ways of taking care of ourselves that have been quite practical. And there are some people who haven't got computers, they don't have internet. It's very hard for some families who can't afford some of the things that we just take for granted. So we've got local agencies like Lions Club. I don't know if you have these things in the States, who are really good at helping to make sure somebody has an iPad at home. Or then there are the issues with domestic violence and families that are just not used to living on top of one another all the time. Building a safe space in home is really hard, and I can't underestimate how hard that is for some. But practically taking care of myself and finding ways to stay connected while staying home and staying safe, it's not at all easy. And when you've got a child who's constantly yelling, biting, throwing things, there's no escape. You can't get a respite person in. You can't get respite. All these things are very, very, very difficult. I don't know what the answer is. I only know how we try to get around it here at our place. But it's the mental health stuff, it's massive amongst our community. We've just done a study on COVID impact on autistic population. And I know that some of those figures and some of the reasons people were saying, oh, well, this must suit all your autistic people because you're not social. The results show the absolute opposite. Absolute opposite. We do need community and we do need to connect. So those sorts of outcomes were very interesting. It's finding how to put that into practice in this era. That's a tough one.
I'm wondering about the value of looking at different learning settings and how it might fit with RDI. For example, I've heard a lot of you mention what I would call a teachable moment and really using tangible, let's cook together, let's do this together, or finding out what interests the child and you know, capitalizing on that. I know in our state, in Colorado, we have an open enrollment process where we can pick schools, and our family always looked at where our daughter's strengths were and what educationally, programmatically would feed that. And for us, that was Montessori. Montessori was very hands-on and you got to do. So I'm wondering, in that same respect, how much is that something parents should be looking at as well as what are their choices educationally that might reinforce some of what you're doing in RDI, and what's your experience with that? Anyone can jump in.
Well, my experience is that we want to start with the child's needs. What kind of framing and scaffolding the child needs to become independent? Where's the place that's going to meet that child where he or she is? And of course, we live in the middle of a huge metropolitan area, so any school you would want is here in Houston. But it doesn't mean that every school is good for every child. And I really feel that there are some children who are better homeschooled if the parents can do it, because I think the parents are working so hard on the relationship and the child's competence and the child's thinking, that if the child goes to school and comes home and the parent has to teach them everything they didn't learn in school, the child has no time for himself. I'm a firm believer that everybody needs time to himself. And I think sometimes we rush our children too much. We need to give them the time to do nothing.
Mhm.
You know, if you want to do nothing, do nothing. I need time to do nothing, and I bet every one of us needs time to do nothing. So thinking about everything from the composition of the classroom to what's being taught to how it's being taught. And also, I never discount a kind teacher.
You know, it's interesting you were talking about homeschooling, because in one of our other sessions with Dr. Marlo Thurman, she was talking about how this time of COVID is such a unique opportunity to have special time with our children. That yes, we're locked up in our houses now, but to take advantage of that and perhaps do project-based learning. That it is very difficult for these hybrid school programs to meet some of these needs, and it might be an opportunity to think out of the box on different ways to teach. Is that kind of what I hear you saying, Dr. Sheely?
Yes.
And just to bring your point home, Theresa, that there was a great plague of London in 1865, and Sir Isaac Newton had to leave his school in Cambridge, went to his parents' house when he was 24, I think, years old. And now he could take a breath and pursue his own interests. Of course, with our kids, they may need help. I don't think he needed help. And that's when he discovered the theory of gravity. So just to bring your point home, it's an opportunity to develop the interest of your child the way he or she wants to go.
I think you always have to take the interest of your child, whether they are on the spectrum or not, and feed it. And you can learn so many different things from an interest. You can push and pull it different ways, right? You can teach out
that's so true. You've got to observe. You've got to be open-minded as to what the person is attracted to. I mean, sometimes people will ask me, what is my autistic child good at? Maybe even the autistic person will ask me, how do I know what I'm good at? And then I respond to that question with another question, which is what you're not supposed to do, but I do it anyways. And that is, I say, how do they spend most of their time, or would spend most of their time if you let them do it? Or Dr. Wren,
Brilliant question, Stephen.
how do you spend most of your time, or would, if and what that will do is that will lead me to what the person likes to do. And we tend to be good at the things we like to do. We tend to like the things that we're good at. And it's from there that we can use this information as a lever in which to explore possibilities for future areas of study, for using this particular interest intrinsically to teach what needs to be taught. Not going down the behavioral trap of saying, "Ooh, I've got myself a nice reinforcer, which now I'm going to take away." But you do have the opportunity to earn it back if you're good. Not that, but using it, integrating it with whatever that person needs to be taught and developed. And if we do this, we have the real possibility, or we're setting the stage for that person leading a fulfilling and productive life, doing something that they're good at, something that they enjoy, and that person maybe even becoming a regional, national, or international expert on that subject.
Could I say something, Theresa? You know, as I was sitting here listening to the conversation, and I know listening to myself, I feel sometimes our parents are really hard on themselves because they feel like I should be doing more, I should be doing more, I should be doing more. And particularly now that their children are home, they're feeling a lot more pressure. And I would just say to parents, what you're doing is fine, it's good enough. And take care of yourself. Take care of yourself first. And if that means your child doesn't do any school today, that's okay. But take the pressure off of yourself, because once we get aroused, our children get aroused as well. And I'm a big advocate for parents getting their nails done.
Spot on.
I want to piggyback what Steve just said, and that is, yes, if you look at these chess grandmasters or people in Silicon Valley, you'll probably get some of these people on the autism spectrum, or look at the accomplishments of Wenn and Steve themselves. But I also want to bring up, as you're fulfilling the wants and the needs and the excitement of pursuing their interests, there could be a therapeutic idea behind it. And it could be something that they're not quite getting cognitively, like accepting someone else's viewpoint. And you could kind of include that in their interest, that, hey, I want to turn to bat. You know, you don't, why should you always bat? I want to turn to, I like to play chess therapeutically. You have to look at what my move is. And so you could also see this as a real therapeutic model of going with their interest, and also see what they need in terms of their development.
Isn't it also an opportunity to, and I'm just speaking again from my personal experience with my daughter, but in looking at her interests, not only did it allow us to open a space for her to engage with us and to build a relationship, as Temple Grandin likes to say, it's also something that might turn into a paycheck. And I'm just wondering, for our self-advocates, Dr. Shore and Dr. Lawson, you know, you're both educators now. How did you get into that? How did your parents realize that and play to that?
Not for me. I didn't have parental support through anything, but I was just driven. So it's personality for me. And I went to school at 38 to do the last 2 years of high school. Nobody expected me to be able to complete them because I also supposedly had an assessment for intellectual disability. So I got a high enough grade to get into university, where I discovered my community and people just like me. We sometimes say universities are sheltered workshops for people on the spectrum. Don't say that too loudly, but it could be a kid that loves water, you know, ends up with a job washing cars. It could be, I know a young lad who was fascinated with rubbish bins, and he just collects. He's got his own business now. He collects the bins at the end of every street, puts them in the spot for the person to collect them, who empties them each week. And there are so many things. It doesn't have to be educated. It doesn't have to be you're high functioning, which I hate that term. You've got more skills, you've got language, you've got more ability. Well, actually, I didn't talk until I was almost 5, as you said, way past 4, and was in diapers or nappies till I was 6 at night. Everything was really delayed in my life, and I didn't have support. Nobody expected me to achieve anything. But I had one person who really believed in me, who happened to be in an institution that I was put into at a certain time. And she used to come and just play her guitar and sing. All she did was give me time. I'll never forget, and she's one of my close friends now, but she just gave me time. And she taught me, in fact, I gave up speech at 13 because it always got me into trouble. But I found my way back into speech through music and singing. I'm part of a very musical family. So everybody's different, and it's not always that you seem to be educationally or intellectually capable or able. It's not always that you have speech. It can be anything. I have a lad who loves smoke alarms. He can take 5, 6, 7, 8 smoke alarms to school. Not at school currently, they're in lockdown, but and talk about all the different colors and shapes and sizes, take them apart. You know, I can see a huge future for this young boy. It can be the smallest of things.
Yeah. Well, my parents always supported my interests. So from my point of view, it was when I was interested in astronomy, they bought a telescope and they seemed to be interested in astronomy. When I was interested in chemistry, they got a chemistry set and we all got involved in chemistry, whatever it was. Same for music. Insofar as teaching, it's something that I've wanted to do for a long time. Even in grade school, I thought teaching was a cool thing to do. My parents were always friendly with the teachers, and often the teachers would come to our home to just hang out and relax. So I saw teachers as people, as opposed to people who lived in school. When I found, and this is up in middle and high school, when music became my focus, one of my focused interests, when I learned that having to learn all the instruments to get a degree in music education was a requirement, well, that just seemed to be the thing to do. And so I just continued learning instruments. I'd already learned about 15, and so on to college, studying music education. Was going to become a music teacher, public school music teacher. Ended up getting another degree in business and working in a bank, but also still teaching at area schools. And then finally doing that full time, but business courses, not music courses. Then I slowly moved into music and was a professor of music in a formal life. And then towards the end of my doctoral degree, I got more interested in autism. So I defected from the School of Music to the School of Education and got my doctorate in that, and still use my music to teach students, to teach autistic people how to play music. And it's a lot of fun to do that. And so that's where my interest in teaching came from. And now, as a professor of special education, I'm enjoying it. So it answers the question, how do you spend most of your time, or would spend most of your time if you could do it?
you. Hey, we're almost out of time. So I'm going to do what I call the Miss America question. Before I do, I want to give a plug to vocational schools, just as they are opportunities to learn skills, but also be in relation within a skill. So if you have an interest, check and see if your public school or the school you're in has that opportunity. It can be another type of benefit, and will probably work well with RDI in terms of helping scaffolding how those relationships work in the workplace. So Miss America question. It's hard to believe an hour and a half has gone by. If there was one thing you wanted viewers right now to take away about RDI and its value, what would that one thing be? Rob, let's start with you.
Well, I think the idea of relationships is really important, because those of us who work with autistic kids for years or decades, I think we've become relationship experts, because by definition, every person who's on this spectrum has a relationship issue, a socialization issue. So like it or not, we've all become, whether we have Asperger's or we treat or work with Asperger's people, we become relationship experts. So, and that's how I'm viewing RDI in that broad viewpoint, that we can look at the real life situations. The only thing that I would add for people to take away is that sometimes when you want the child to relate to somebody else, they need to grow internally. They need to understand, for example, that there's another viewpoint, another person's viewpoint. Something seems very simple and obvious, but if a child doesn't have that idea that you have to understand whatever situation you're in from another person's viewpoint, that may need to be worked on first before you expect them to relate to somebody in the way you want them to relate. So I could add that to the mix. But I really want to thank Dr. Rachelle Sheely for coming. And I think we all know a little bit more about RDI than we did before.
Absolutely. Dr. Sheely, do you want to answer the Miss America question?
I think I would like to say something. I'm sure there are parents on tonight. What I'd like to say is that you'll get a lot of advice, and you'll get a lot of well-meaning people who want to guide you or tell you what to do. But in the end, your child is your child. And the decision you make for your child will be the best decision. And I just want parents to have that knowledge that who they are in terms of their child's parent is exactly what their child needs.
Thank you so much. That's so true. Dr. Lawson, what would your answer be? One thing to take away tonight?
It's always nothing about me without me. So yeah, check in, ask me. And just because I don't talk, it doesn't mean I don't think. It just means you need to find a way to communicate with me that works for us both. So that's the relationship. Nothing about me without me. And parents, you know your kids, so trust your gut.
So true. Stephen?
My takeaway is focus on working with your child, with the characteristics. Join them in a relationship on their terms. Find out what they're interested in. Basically, find out who they are. How do they communicate? And by working with, as opposed to against, and using an abilities-based model, asking what can the person can do, I think we'll all be much better off.
I think that's more than true for this population that we're concerned with. I guess my Miss America would be, do trust your gut, like we've heard said. I remember the list of can'ts we got on my daughter, and one of them was she couldn't read, and I knew they were wrong because she was already reading. Take each moment and make it teachable. You know more than you think you do, and develop your relationship with your child. Thank you for joining us tonight. And
And
thank
I
you
wanna-
all of our panelists so much. Such a rich conversation. Thank you.